Depressingly, shoddy epilogues are commonplace when it comes to horror. However, there are certain slashers, sci-fi indies, and splatterfests that find themselves on the other side of the spectrum. The third act turned out so well, it almost justifies watching these atrocious flicks. So with that in mind, I'm Ellie for What Culture, and here are 10 terrible horror movies that reward you for staying until the end. Number 10. Chud. Based on Chud's negative reception, it's easy to understand why Douglas Cheek's directorial debut was also the last film he oversaw. The sci-fi horror, which centers around sewer-dwelling mutants attacking the surface world, is as B-movie as they come. With its bad dialogue, worse acting, and ropey effects, Chud is a textbook example of so bad it's good. However, the third act proves the story is much smarter than it initially appeared. As our heroes make their way through the sewers, they discover a nuclear container marked Contamination Hazard Urban Disposal, or Chud. Slowly but surely, they realise the government has been illegally transporting toxic materials underground, mutating anyone who came into contact with it. When the mutants began preying on the poor, the authorities chose to do nothing, believing poverty had gotten out of hand in the city. In that moment, it's clear the mutants aren't evil monsters, but victims. What makes this revelation more shocking is the fact that the poster was deliberately misleading, stating Chud stood for cannibalistic humanoid underground dwellers. Since the first hour is drearily formulaic, it was surprising to see such a biting social commentary thrown in the 11th hour. Number 9. Wishmaster. In Wishmaster, an evil djinn is released upon the world after a drunk crane operator drops the statue he was sealed in. On paper, a genie deliberately distorting his host's wishes for his own wicked schemes has a lot of potential. Sadly, the Wes Craven-produced flick never lives up to expectations. Andrew Divoff tries his darnest as the gleeful djinn, chewing the scenery every time he appears. However, he comes across as campy rather than intimidating, diluting the scare factor. Some of the botched wishes are inventive, but they're let down by awful special effects. With that said, how the djinn is destroyed is genius. After cornering the final girl, Alexandra, the titular demon commands her to make a wish. At first, Alexandra refuses, knowing the magical fiend will warp her desires into something horrid. Racking her brain, she finally realizes how to beat the djinn. Staring him down defiantly, Alexandra wishes that the crane operator had been sober while transporting the statue several days earlier. Since he didn't clumsily drop the antique, the djinn was never released, reversing all the damage he'd done since. Wishmaster isn't great, but it's hard to think of a smarter way a horror villain has been defeated. Number 8. Slumber Party Massacre 2. As campy as the Slumber Party Massacre was, it doesn't hold a candle to this sequel. Boasting dance routines, singing solos, and a villainous greaser armed with a drill guitar, this slasher musical couldn't be more bonkers. That's why it's a pity how it never really comes together. Though the musical numbers are entertaining, they go on too long to maintain interest. And with the driller killer now attacking his victims in their dreams, this film feels like a blatant rip-off of A Nightmare on Elm Street. Fortunately, it ends with a mind-melting gotcha moment. After Courtney sets the killer on fire, it looks like he's gone for good. However, this turns out to be a fake-out. Courtney wakes up in her bedroom with her boyfriend who was supposedly murdered by the jackhammering maniac. But it turns out to be a double fake-out. Courtney wakes up again, this time in a dank asylum. As she hallucinates the killer drilling into her room, it appears the events in the first film caused Courtney to snap, forcing her to be institutionalized. For such a goofy sequel, it was shocking to see things take such a dark turn at the very last minute. Number 7. The Last Broadcast. The Blair Witch Project may have popularized pseudo-documentaries, but it wasn't the first of its kind. Not only has that subgenre been around for decades, there was a similar film released a year earlier. 1998's The Last Broadcast is a found-footage indie that explores unsolved murders in the Pine Barrens. Even though The Last Broadcast utilised the fake doc style before The Blair Witch Project, it didn't leave an impact for one simple reason. It's terrible. It never feels like a genuine documentary due to the stilted performances. While certain lines are repeated with such regularity, they end up rendering the whole thing tedious. However, the final reveal is a real didn't see that coming moment. When a data researcher discovers a blurred image of the killer, she uses reconstructive technology to create a clear shot of his face. To her horror, the killer is revealed to be Lee, the filmmaker behind the documentary. But before she has a chance to expose him, Lee appears from behind and strangles her to death. After disposing of the body, Lee continues with the documentary without anyone being the wiser. Number 6. The Forest. Over the years, Aokigahara Forest in Japan has become a common sight for people taking their lives. Since the upsetting subject matter has spawned stories involving ghosts in the area, it's surprising it took until 2016 before it was adapted into a horror film. In the forest, Sarah Price heads to Aokigahara to find her sister after learning she disappeared there. Sadly, the forest doesn't execute on its premise as well as it should have. Even though the plot deals with childhood trauma, abandonment, and unresolved grief, it struggles to explore such issues effectively, with the film quickly descending into a hodgepodge of hollow scares. Although it comes too late, the forest saves its best ideas for last. While lost in a hallucination, a spirit representing Sarah's abusive father grabs her by the wrist. She manages to slice his fingers off, giving her enough time to run away. After seeing her sister escape from the forest, it seems like everything worked out for the best. But as Sarah looks down, she's horrified to see her hand is bleeding. And in that moment, Sarah realizes she accidentally cut her wrist while attacking the ghost, and has been hallucinating from blood loss since. Before she has a chance to escape for real, Sarah is dragged under the forest by a legion of ghosts, becoming a wandering spectre herself. Number 5. No One Gets Out Alive. Based on the novel of the same name, No One Gets Out Alive follows a poverty-stricken immigrant called Ambar who's forced to take refuge in a dilapidated house. Though the source material was a bone-chilling page-turner, the Netflix exclusive is anything but. Unlike the book, the thought-provoking commentary is barely explored, and is instead replaced with cheap scares. The sudden flashbacks and dream sequences, meanwhile, make it difficult to understand what's happening half the time. However, the monster reveal is so spine-stiffening it nearly saves the movie. In the climax, Ambar learns that her landlord hopes to obtain godlike powers by sacrificing her to an Aztec deity. With its knife-shaped wings, fingered feet, toothed genitalia, and its flapping flesh dragging on the floor, the divine being is a sight to behold. On top of that, the scene is shot and directed magnificently, making its grand reveal more impressive. It may not have much screen time, but the creature is arguably one of the most inventive and unnerving movie monsters over the last decade. Just too bad it didn't appear in a much better movie. Number 4. Dead End. The Twilight Zone-like drama Dead End opens with Frank Harrington driving with his family to see the in-laws. Bored of the scenery, Frank decides to take a shortcut. During their detour, the Harringtons get lost, pick up a strange woman in white, almost get involved in a car crash, and find themselves being followed by a mysterious hearse. Unfortunately, Dead End isn't as gripping as it should be, since the majority of scenes involve the family squabbling. There are a few intriguing mysteries, but the bickering quickly grows tiresome, especially since the characters keep repeating the same questions over and over. The cast do a solid job, but they're fighting an uphill battle since they don't have much to work with. Having said that, the finale is a real jaw-dropper. It turns out Frank fell asleep at the wheel in the opening, crashing the car into the woman in white's vehicle, killing everyone except his daughter, Marion. Waking from a coma, Marion realizes she has imagined the events depicted throughout the story. Although they were dead all along and it was all a dream are a cliche, Dead End gets away with it since it was so unexpected. Number 3. Blood Rage. In Blood Rage's defense, it has a captivating premise. After a psychotic child called Todd Simmons commits murder, he frames his twin brother Terry, causing him to be institutionalized for a decade. As Todd begins to kill again, he learns his sibling has escaped from the psychiatric institution. Before he's recaptured by the police, Terry must prove his own innocence and put an end to Todd's killing spree once and for all. Due to the bereft direction and anemic script, the uncreative slasher drags despite the 82-minute runtime. But if anything comes close to salvaging this mess, it's the epilogue. Recognizing Todd has been the murderer all along, his mother, Maddie, shoots him before embracing Terry. Or so she believes. When her surviving son reveals he's Todd, Maddie realizes she shot Terry by mistake. Unable to forgive herself, Maddie takes her own life, allowing Todd to get away scot-free. The fake-out isn't just clever, but surprisingly tragic. Considering everything Terry had suffered over the previous 10 years, it was a shame to see him getting screwed over yet again. Number 2. Friday the 13th, Part 7, The New Blood. A hulking zombie squaring off against a psychic teenager sounds like a movie too dumb to exist. But rest assured, that is the plot of Friday the 13th, The New Blood. After a telekinetic girl called Tina uses her powers to accidentally awaken Jason Voorhees from his watery grave, the hockey-masked revenant goes on a rampage, slaughtering everyone in his path. Even though the franchise has its duds, this installment is near the bottom of the pile. The premise is ridiculous, the script and characterization are bare bones, and the kills are devoid of gore, almost as if the filmmakers were pushing for a PG rating. That's why it's ironic how The New Blood's ending is arguably the most entertaining scene in the franchise. Using her powers, Tina batters Jason senseless, knocks him through a staircase, strangles him with a fan wire, impales him with nails, sets him on fire, and drops a roof on him. Major props to the actor Kane Hodder for performing these stunts himself. Also, this is easily the best Jason has ever looked. With his decomposing face on full display and his exposed bones jutting out of his rotting flesh, the machete-wielding brute has never appeared more menacing. Number 1. The Fly 2. David Cronenberg's Fly remake ended with the insectoid physicist Seth Brundle having his brains blown out. As a result, there was no need to continue the story. Nevertheless, an unnecessary sequel was greenlit that focused on Brundle's hybrid son, Martin. 1986's The Fly was the peak of body horror. The sequel, on the other hand, is just another schlocky creature feature. However, it's deeply satisfying to see the villainous scientist Bartok get his comeuppance. Bartok manipulated Martin since the day he was born, did nothing to stop his transformation, and planned to use Martin's mutated body for profit. And worst of all, Bartok used the malfunctioning teleporter on an adorable dog, leaving it in unbearable pain until Martin put it out of its misery. To exact his revenge, Martin teleports himself in the pod with Bartok, transferring his fly genes to the megalomaniacal scientist. Reborn as a deformed blob, Bartok is forced to live the remainder of his pathetic life in unimaginable agony. It doesn't redeem the movie, but the ending stops the previous 100 minutes from feeling like a waste of time.